Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer with the podcast from Maladumim in Israel. It is well known that there are no universal definitions for happiness or misery. What brings one person happiness might be a source of misery for another. Everybody seeks happiness and tries to avoid misery, but what they actually are is left to personal choice. Not only that, but it is not uncommon that happiness or misery can be based not on an individual's personal experience, but on how they see themselves in relation to others. This is so common in our lives that we take it for granted. It is a kind of all-encompassing version of keeping up with the Joneses. We may be perfectly happy with what is going on in our lives, but tortured by the fact that somebody else, a neighbor or a colleague, has it better. It is a bit bizarre that this phenomenon is so prevalent amongst us. Shouldn't we be able to just shrug this sort of thing off and just ignore it? But alas, we all know that things don't work this way. We are frequently stuck with the emotional burden of comparing ourselves with others, even against our own better judgment. Not everybody is burdened with this form of a self-imposed curse. Some are able to walk away from such nonsense without so much as a thought. These people are truly blessed, for they have spared themselves of the need to base their own happiness and satisfaction on the standards of others. We all could find a way to master this bit of personalized magic. We would find that our lives would be enriched 100-fold. But it's not so easy as waving a magic wand, as anybody who has attempted this and failed knows. Even the Bible has no great formula for fending off this curse. It is not hard to find a verse here and there hinting at this problem or even stating it outright. This is classic envy and jealousy rearing their ugly heads. We might find something about how it rots the bones or eats away at the body or something along those lines. The self-imposed need to judge our own happiness by the standards of others has been there since biblical times, and it's not going away anytime soon. This week's Parsha is called Bo. It's the shortest title for a Parsha, only 2 Hebrew letters. It means come, the beginning of a command from God to Moshe to return to Pharaoh once more to warn him of the next upcoming plague. This would be number 8 on the list. The first 7 were in last week's Parsha, and devastating as they were, had almost no impact on Pharaoh's refusal to let the Israelites go. This was partially due to Pharaoh's own stubbornness and partially due to a divinely imposed freezing of his ability to cave into the pressure. God wanted this business with the plagues to go on all the way, and there were still 3 more plagues in store. The 8th was the locusts. While locusts were a standard biblical problem, this particular onslaught was uniquely devastating. They ate everything that was left over from the first 7 plagues. Nevertheless, when push came to shove, God hardened Pharaoh's heart and refused to back down. The 9th plague was darkness. This is described as 3 days of darkness in which nobody could see his brother, nor could they rise from their place. But it says all the Israelites had light in their dwellings. There is a bit of a dialogue between Pharaoh and Moshe to conclude this plague. Pharaoh brought Moshe back to his presence and insisted that they go and serve God, but stipulated that they leave their flocks behind. They would even be able to take their children with them. Leaving the flocks behind presumably guaranteed that they would have to return to Egypt. Moshe's response to this was that even Pharaoh would give them offerings with which to serve God. They would take their livestock, every last one, for they did not know what Hashem would require of them when they reached the appointed place. God then once again hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he refused to deal with Moshe again, threatening that the next time he saw him, he would die. The final plague, which takes up the bulk of the Parsha, is the killing of the firstborn. While this is the most impossible sounding of the plagues, it was ultimately the one that worked. How exactly could a plague kill off only the firstborn? Frogs, disease, lice, locusts, even darkness are all possible from a somewhat natural point of view. But killing of the firstborn is something that only a supernatural source of power could make happen. Nevertheless, this is the famous crescendo to the plagues of Egypt and the final stage before the Exodus. In between the threat of the plague and the actual plague is a long intermission which first Moshe and then the Israelites were instructed in the laws of Passover. The reason for this is that Passover celebrates the miraculous sparing of the Israelites in the face of the great plague that was encompassing the land. All the various laws, including the matzah, the bitter herbs, and the lamb or goat for the meal, in some way serve as reminders of the past suffering or a hint to the future exodus. All future Passover celebrations would be throwbacks to this first example. When it all actually happens, it seems a bit anticlimactic. In just a few short verses, the whole thing is over. The plague does its devastation, and Pharaoh buckles under immediately. He insists that Moshe take all the Israelites and leave right away. He even requests that they bless him. The Israelites then leave with their unleavened dough on their backs, a mysterious repetition of the Passover meal they had just completed. The Passover in Egypt was different from all future Passovers in that it was the real thing and not just a commemoration. Not only that, but it celebrated not the past, but the future. It was a celebration of the Exodus that was about to happen. The rest of the Parsha deals with the actual Exodus and some customs that came as an aftermath to the Exodus. Most of these have to do with the various laws of Passover, which became the central Israelite celebration. The reason for the celebration would have to be asked always, lest they be forgotten. Something like this doesn't happen at just any time. It was a unique event in the history of the world and had to be treated accordingly. Let's get back to that ninth plague. The plague was darkness. It came about as close as any of the plagues to actually working, but was killed at the last minute by Pharaoh's insistent demands. It is a bit unclear in the Torah exactly what this plague was. Darkness can be a terrifying thing, but it hardly ranks up there with locusts or disease or devastating hail. Granted that 3 days of it was anything but a picnic, it still doesn't seem like something that should have shaken Pharaoh to the point of almost giving in. It was only 3 days of sitting in the dark, probably something that wasn't altogether unheard of in the days before electricity. What was it about this plague that was so effective? Rabbinic tradition has a great deal to say about what really happened during this plague, perhaps because the basic description given in the Torah seems a bit underwhelming. The plague is somehow stretched to 6 days, and it includes a kind of thick fog that glues everybody in place, paralyzing them wherever they were. The tradition even includes the surprising fact that 80% of the Israelites died during this time. These were those members who didn't want to leave and were now suffering the consequences. As dramatic as all this sounds, it really doesn't help to answer the basic question. The Torah describes this as simple darkness. So why was it a plague at all, let alone the ninth on the list? Darkness is an interesting phenomenon. We all experience it daily. It is fairly difficult to go more than a few days without encountering darkness in some way. Most people don't get scared of the dark after a certain age, but everybody gets a little freaked out over being stuck in pitch dark, especially in an unfamiliar situation. There is something about darkness that unnerves us a bit, as if it is a bit unnatural, even though it is really the most natural thing in the world. It is a little strange, this queasiness over the most natural condition. Why do we have this almost universal reaction? As far as we can tell, no animals react to darkness in this way. To them, it is simply the world without its daily influx of light. It's just the world turning on its axis. But to us, it is somehow a little threatening, as if we lost some of the control over lives that we normally believe to be our birthright. Perhaps the answer to this question and to the question of what the plague was is that we are addicted to light. Light is the most magnificent thing in the world. It changes everything instantly. It is what makes the darkness dark and threatening. It is in comparison to the reassuring condition of light that we feel the danger of darkness. If light is available and it isn't used, it makes the darkness all the more problematic. So it was in Egypt. 3 days of darkness may not have been all that terrible, but the Israelites had light in their dwellings. This was the problem. Those guys down the road had light and everybody else didn't. It made the darkness thicker, more palpable, scarier. If there was light next door, but it's dark where you were, that darkness is almost impenetrable. You cannot move. Perhaps this plague was the most natural manifestation of that common practice of judging our own happiness by what others around us have. If everybody had to dwell in the darkness, perhaps things wouldn't have been so bad. But when light is out there somewhere, just not where you are, the darkness is nothing less than a plague. It was the light in the dwellings of the Israelites that caused the darkness to assume its terrifying form. Darkness was a plague because somebody else had light. It doesn't have to be this way. There could have been only 9 plagues with a brief period of darkness towards the end that people just lived through until it was over. But that is not the way our minds work. When we insist on living by the standards of others, we subject ourselves to all sorts of plagues. It is only by removing those self-imposed blinders from our eyes that we can see the folly of this pernicious habit. Our happiness is in our own hands, not in the hands of others. Shabbat Shalom.